Imagine the following scenario. You were dragged into some art exhibition by a friend or loved one. It's all abstract, and you're just so bored. We've all been there, right? They're explaining something excitedly, and because you're a good friend, you try to listen, but it just nothing makes sense. You ask yourself, what's this even supposed to be? Or how's this not something my kid can do? Or why do people pay lots of money for random splotches of paint? Here's where you went wrong. You're asking the wrong questions. I'm not saying that these questions are invalid, because let's face it, sometimes they are, but they will not help you in this situation. Now, I'm not going to be that person who tries to convince you that you have to like abstract art, that you're stupid or uneducated if you don't. That's just complete BS. No, all art is subjective and a matter of taste. Well, most artists, anyway. Why should you listen then? Well, because maybe during one of those exhibitions, one of the art pieces spoke to you. You can't describe why, you just kind of like the color scheme. Or maybe it gave you some visceral reaction, good or bad. But you don't know why. Maybe even tried to recreate it at home because, like, hard can it be. But it just wasn't the same. This is obviously different for different people. But if you're open to it and you allow yourself to look at it as more than just trying to decipher what it's supposed to represent, you might develop a more nuanced opinion. Maybe. So in this lesson, I'll equip you with a series of tools to learn to understand and maybe even appreciate abstract art. Or at least to not be bored anymore at art exhibitions. Or if you are that friend who wants to share your interest with others, but you don't know how to explain, then maybe you'll find this useful as well. I'll also provide some prompts in the end that you can use to create some abstract art of your own. Because the best way to tackle a subject is always a combination of both a passive and an active approach. So let's try to find which questions we can ask ourselves instead. Well, to sum it up, I believe that the best place to start is in the context of the creation of the art piece. Because you see, it's more complex than you might think. It's not just randomly splotching paint on canvas. Well, okay, in some cases it really is only that, but even then, there's a process to it. There are decisions involved. I've found that these decisions tend to come about in two ways. They can be just out of the gut, or they can be an intellectual process. Well, it's usually an amalgamation of these two ways. Of course, hybrids of both exist. In fact, most people are hybrids. But I'll explain using these two extreme versions of artists, or rather of creative processes. Also, some of the examples I'm using are from the previous lesson. It's not a prerequisite for this one, but it explains how artists see things. So you might find that useful as well. So the first artist is tapping purely into their instinct or into their current emotion. They might take a brush, dip it in whatever paint their instinct decides, and let their emotions guide it. Or maybe they just enjoy randomness and trust in the muse of chaos to lead the way. Either way, it's not truly random. There are micro decisions made every step of the way, but those are mostly subconscious. These types of artwork are the ones that tend to evoke a more visceral reaction. You might look at it and see fear or anger, for example, but you don't know why. It might be because that artist felt fear or anger at that moment, or they were using their art therapeutically to deal with some unresolved fear or anger within them. Anyway, the example that I used in the previous lesson is that of painting an emotion that the image evokes. So you can capture an object, in this case a tree, without actually drawing it, if that makes sense. The second artist prefers the intellectual approach. They develop a form-finding method, some system or formula. They might, for example, choose a small, detailed spot of an object that kind of caught their eye, blow it up, and paint that. So it's unrecognizable out of context, but it has an actual source. Or they choose the forces that influence the object, like the tree in this example. gravity, wind, dynamics, etc. And they draw and paint only that, and ignore the actual shapes. This is similar to what I do, but that's for another lesson. Yet other artists might take a specific property, the colors, or various lengths and other measurements, or I don't know, the sound associated with the object, and arrange that in some predefined sequence. Well, endless possibilities. Now, this doesn't mean that these artists are cold and devoid of emotion. It's just another way of finding the essence of what you're trying to depict. Some people just prefer, structure in their lives. Maybe I should mention here why we differentiate between abstract art and abstraction. Abstract art is the overarching term for art that isn't figurative. Abstraction is just a method within that, where you start with something figurative and you transform it into something abstract. Some of the examples from earlier fall into that category, which is why I'm mentioning it here, just to clarify. At this point, you might ask yourself, but then when is it art? And how can I tell the good from the bad? Well, hubris has me tackle that in a future lesson that's already partially scripted, so look out for that. But anyway, the quality of the artwork isn't subject today, but rather, how can we understand what even is this thing I'm looking at? So back to this lesson. What did I mean when I said that the answer is in the context of its creation? Well, it goes back to something I said in the first lesson, that art, like everything, exists within that context. It's where we find clues about the motivation behind a piece of creation. Because everything is interdisciplinary and nothing stands by itself. Let's look at our hypothetical artist, the creator of that hypothetical art piece. Let's find that context and find new questions to ask. Question 1. Who is the artist? What is their background? There's a human behind the artwork after all, who has gone through their own trials and tribulations. This is also something AI art will never be able to replicate, by the way. I believe, anyway. This leads us to 2. When was the art piece created? What happened on that date, in the world, in the artist's life, in art in general? Historical and also technological development is always, and has always been, a driving factor of artistic expression. 3. So then, who and what did this artist take influences from? Where and how were they educated? Maybe they were, or are, part of a particular artistic movement. Other questions are more speculative. For instance, 4. What is the title of the art piece? Why do you think the artist chose that title? In case that information isn't available. Or you can look at the more technical aspects, like 5. What medium did the artist choose, and why? Is there relevance in the technological development of the era? Maybe it's just what they preferred or had access to, but maybe it was to experiment in a search of something new and innovative. How, for example, did the internet change the way we create or perceive art? How will artists react to the current advancements in AI, for example? To get back to older concepts. 6. Does it fit the golden ratio? What effect does that have? Maybe one piece of art has a calming effect, and another feels disturbing or somehow off balance, but not necessarily in a bad way. Look at framing in general. Also notice how, when there are several colors in a painting, they're barely used in the same amount. These are tools that artists use to give their work some dynamics or points of interest. About that. 7. What could the choice of colors mean? Do they even have a meaning, or are they random? And this leads us to our final question that I hinted at earlier. 8. Why does this one piece speak to me and not to others? and vice versa. Can I relate to whatever influenced the artist at that moment, while the other person can't, and vice versa? Just some things to think about, or at least to occupy yourself with. All this sounds like too much homework. I mean, do I always read up on the biography of an artist before an exhibition? Do I research the entire political, social, economic, and technological environment of the region that the artist operates in? Or operated in, if we're looking at a historical context? Do I then write an entire essay to hypothesize on the motivations of the artist to use yellow instead of orange on that one spot at the bottom left of their painting? Well, no. But I do try to at least read the info plaque that's usually posted in large print when you enter. And maybe I even do a quick 5-minute Google search. Yes, sometimes I'm even too lazy for that, but I can tell you, it's worth it and helps you find answers to the above questions. You might have to tune out that art curator lingo blah that the actual information is wrapped in, though. Something I'll get into in that future lesson as well. Still too much work. Well, thankfully, some of the questions are more speculative in nature. And, honestly, why not make up your own story about the artist and their creation? Which can be a whole other fun game. Or while we're at games, you can always fall back to bullshit bingo. Art exhibit bingo. Ooh, that's a great idea for my Patreon. I'm writing that down. Exhibition bingo card. So anyway, I want to end all my lessons with exercises. Honestly, I'm kind of reluctant to do that here because I don't want to hinder your own creative process. So you can choose to ignore this section, but like I said earlier, I do feel that in order to appreciate or to understand the origins and motivations behind artwork, you also need to try to create yourself. Get into the mindset of the artist, so to say. I will keep it purposefully vague. And I did promise some prompts, didn't I? So here's some ideas. Take an object, any object, and try out some of the following. 1. Zoom in on a tiny detail of that object, say a square inch, or even a square centimeter, or I don't know, use a microscope. Blow that up and paint that. Or zoom out for that matter. 2. Define what forces affect your object. Gravity, pressure, maybe something's pulling at it, maybe it's moving. And draw those as lines, as blobs, as whatever your instinct wants. But omit the outlines of the object itself. 3. What does the object mean to you? Is it something that you like to eat? Well, then how would you illustrate its quenching of your hunger? Or is it the wall in front of you? Does this wall confine you or does it give you safety? Paint that emotion. Is it a picture of your ex? What color is anger? Light it on fire or drown it in the ocean. Figuratively, of course, please don't make fire in your home or an ocean. 4. Reduce your object to its smallest possible denominator, whatever that means. 5. Find one property of your object, just one. Its color, its shape, its weight, its smell. And well, you decide what to do with that. Anyway, just some ideas. Okay, so this lesson was purely theoretical, so the next one will be more practical. At least that's the plan. Let me know in the comments if any of this made sense. And maybe consider subscribing, even if it didn't. For motivation, And for more content, like behind the scenes stuff, writing, and interaction, please check out my Patreon. Bye, and remember to not always take yourself or me too seriously.